G'day guys, and welcome to another Battleforged Gaming Ultimate Guide. In this episode, we'll be working on a Marine from the Deathwatch chapter. He is built in sub-assemblies with his arms, head, and backpack all separate. Originally, this model was primed with Mephiston Red, but we need to start from a black base, so prime your model with Chaos Black, and then apply 2 thin coats of ABADDON Black. The brush used for this step is a small Citadel dry brush, which is Games Workshop's brand of brushes. With your black dry, the next step is to base coat the gun casings. For this, we're going to mix 2 parts of KHORNE Red with 1 part of ABADDON Black, and you'll need to apply 2 thin coats. For this step, I am using a small Artificer layer brush from Citadel. With that step finished, next we are going to use standard Mechanicus Grey and pick out all of the areas that we are going to eventually paint with Leadbelcher. You also want to paint the entire silver Deathwatch arm with this, as well as the under armour in between the gaps of your black power armour. Areas that are going to be leather, such as the belt or the holster, we're going to mix together Mournfang Brown and Rhinox Hide in a 1-to-1 mix and apply 2 thin coats. With this Marine originating from the Mentors chapter, we are now going to paint his chapter colours on his shoulder pad. First, apply 2 thin coats of Caliban Green to the trim of the shoulder pad. The Caliban Green dry, we are now going to use some grey cere to paint the inset of the shoulder pad. This will take 3 to 4 thin coats. With the grey cere dry, we are now going to take Ulithan Grey and repeat the same process, applying 3 to 4 thin coats of Ulithan Grey to the inset of the shoulder pad. Any areas that we are going to paint gold, we are now going to base coat with XV88, such as the Aquila on the chest and the little locket on his belt. With that step dry, we're going to move on to the wax of the Purity Seal. For this, we're going to base coat with Screamer Pink, and you will apply 2 thin coats of this. With the Screamer Pink dry, we're going to use some Rakarth Flesh to base coat the parchment, again applying 2 thin coats. With 1 part Bugman's and 1 part Cadian Flesh Tone, we are now going to base coat the skin of this Marine. Apply 2 thin coats of this. You can paint the hair any colour you want, but we'll be painting ours brown. For this, we're going to apply 2 thin coats of dryad bark. With that step done, we have applied all of our base coats, so this is how your model will look. Next, we will move on to the details such as edge, highlights and shades. First, we are going to apply some depth to the leathers as well as the Under Armour. For this, we are using some Nuln Oil and just apply this all over the leathers as well as the Under Armour. You can be quite liberal with this, but you do not want it to pull. Let's start adding some detail to those areas now. First, we're going to use some Dawnstone and highlight the raised areas of the Under Armour. Don't worry about the silver Deathwatch arm. We will do that step after varnish. To finish off the details of the Under Armour areas, we're going to use Administratum Grey and apply a dot along the lines of the armour. And this is just an imaginary line where the light would hit. The next area we are going to focus on are the leathers. We're going to apply 2 edge highlights here. The first of which is going to be Mournfang Brown, and this is going to be quite thick to allow for room for the second edge highlight. With the first edge highlight finished, we're going to move on to the second edge highlight. For this, we're using Deathclaw Brown, and this is an edge highlight I like to call a broken edge highlight. It is essentially a series of dots and dashes. Try to make them as random as possible. You can also add some micro scratching just to add some wear and tear to the leathers. With the leathers complete, we're going to move on to the largest time sink of the model, and that is edge highlighting the power armor. This is going to be a 3-step edge highlight, so if you are ever going to skip one of the edge highlights, this would be the one. We are mixing together ABADDON Black and Dark Reaper in a 1-to-1 mix and applying a rather large edge highlight. This is so we have room for the next 2 edge highlights. If you make any mistakes with your edge highlights, don't be afraid to go back with your previous colour and tidy them up. Using a 1 part Eshin Grey and 1 part Dark Reaper mix, we're going to apply our second edge highlight. With this step, we just want to leave some of the first edge highlight visible, but also allowing enough room for our third edge highlight. As previously stated, if you only want to do this with a 2-step recipe, this is the edge highlight you would start with. For the final edge highlight, we are going to mix together 1 part Fenrisian Grey with 1 part Dawnstone. And like any of the other edge highlights, if you make any mistakes, just use some of your previous colour to tidy it up. To finish off our power armour and give it that heavy metal look, we're going to apply a dot edge highlight, mixing together 1 part Administratum Grey to 1 part Blue Horror. Pick out all of the edges of the power armour. Focusing on the weapon casings next, we are going to apply a shade in the recesses and around the rivets of the bolter with a 1-to-1 mix of ABADDON black and water. With your shade completely dried, we're going to apply the first of 2 edge highlights to the bolter. For this, we are mixing together 1 part Mephiston Red with 1 part Khorne Red. You will apply this edge highlight over some of the rivets, so we will revisit those with our shade after we've finished the highlighting. The second edge highlight we are applying to our gun casing is Wild Rider Red, and just like the power armour, we're going to try and leave some of the previous highlight visible, and if you make any mistakes, just use the previous colour to tidy it up. Just like the power armour, we are now going to apply a dot highlight to the weapon casing. For this, we are using Fire Dragon Bright, and it makes a big difference to the finish of this red. With the dot highlights finished, we are now going to revisit those rivets that we had painted over with the edge highlights. For this, use the same mix as we did before with ABADDON and water in a 1-to-1 mix, and this is so we'll be able to apply some metallic rivets to the gun casing later and have them really pop. Moving on to the purity seals next, we're going to mix together 1 part Rakarth flesh to 1 part pallid witch flesh and apply a series of horizontal lines. This is to give it an aged parchment appearance. Using the same technique in the previous step, we are going to use pallid witch flesh, and you want to apply this to the raised areas of the parchment, leaving some of the previous colour visible. You can also use this colour to apply an edge highlight to the edges of the purity seals as well. Mixing 1 part white scar with 1 part pallid witch flesh, we're going to repeat the same process as before, focusing on the higher points of the purity seals, as well as applying an edge highlight to the purity seals. Like the previous steps, we are now going to use white scar, focusing mainly on the highest points and the edges of the purity seals. To finish off the parchment of the purity seals, we're going to use Agrax Earthshade and apply it in the recess between the two pieces of parchment, as well as focusing on shading towards the wax. To paint the script on the purity seals, we're going to mix together 1 part Rhinox hide and 1 part ABADDON black. You do not want to thin this step too much because you will lose control of the paint. Moving on to the wax next, we are going to shade it with some Nuln Oil. With the shade fully dried, we are now going to layer back up with Screamer Pink, leaving some of those darker areas in the wax. Mixing together 1 part of Pink Horror with 1 part of Screamer Pink, you're going to pick out the higher points of the wax, leaving some of the previous colour visible. Adding some Ujabti bone to your previous mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror, you are now going to pick out the highest points of the wax. Again, you want to leave some of the previous colour visible. With the purity seals completed, we're going to focus on the white areas of the model now. With this, we're going to thin down some Thunderhawk blue with Lamian medium, with 1 part Thunderhawk blue to 3 parts Lamian medium. We're going to shade this into the recess of the shoulder pad, as well as shade the whole Aquila on the weapon casing. Using some Ulithan Grey, we are now going to re-layer the highest points of the aquila on the gun casing, and you can also tidy up if you have made any mistakes on the shoulder pad. Finally, to finish off the white areas, we are going to apply a single edge highlight of white scar. Next, we will focus on the trim of the shoulder pad with a mix of 1 part Caliban green to 1 part warpstone glow. We're going to apply the first of 3 edge highlights. The trim of the shoulder pad is so thin that this basically just becomes a layer instead of a highlight, but you can edge highlight the bottom of the shoulder pad. The second edge highlight we are going to use is straight warpstone glow. If you make any mistakes with this step, try your best to tidy it up with your previous colour. The third edge highlight we are going to use for our green is straight mood green. Again, leave some of your previous colour visible, and if you make any mistakes, tidy it up with your previous colour. You can use the edge of your brush for this step. It will make some areas much easier. With your shoulder pad complete, we are now going to focus on the flesh, mixing 1 part Reichland flesh shade with 1 part Lahmian medium. Shade the entirety of the face. I like to paint the eyes before I start layering up the skin, because if we make any mistakes, there is less to tidy up. For this step, we are going to use ABADDON black and paint it into the sockets of the eyes. I like to make a series of dashes to apply this instead of trying to make contact with the model first. With both sockets of the eyes painted, we are now going to take a small amount of Nuln Oil and shade the mouth. This next step is a little bit tricky. We are going to paint the whites of the eyes. For this, we're going to use Ulithan Grey. Your paint can dry out on your brush because you've got such a small amount on it, but just be patient and take your time. We will also paint the teeth whilst we paint the whites of the eyes. With the whites of the eyes and the teeth painted, we are now going to paint the pupils of the eyes. For this, we are going to use ABADDON black. I normally like to position the eyes slightly in from the cheekbones. With the eyes and mouth complete, we are going to move on to layering up the skin. The first layer we're going to apply is Cadian flesh tone. You want to thin this down a little bit just so it leaves some of the previous colour visible, and pick out the highest points of the flesh. Repeating the same as the previous step, we're going to use some Kislev flesh now. Again, you want to thin this down a little bit because you want it to be slightly transparent over the top of the previous colour. Focus on the highest points here as well. Focusing on the highest points of the face now, we're going to use some flayed one flesh. We don't want to thin this down as much as previous steps. It is almost an edge highlight, and you just want to pick out areas like the brow, the nose, the forehead, all the highest points of the face. After completing the face, we're going to paint his hair. Using some Nuln Oil, you simply want to shade the whole of his mohawk. To edge highlight the hair, we're going to use some dried bark and pick out the strands of hair at the front of his mohawk, and then apply some micro dots to the top of the hair. You can stipple this, I just chose to do some micro dots. Repeating the same process, we are now going to use Gorthor brown, and you want to pick out the strands at the front of the hair again and add some micro dots to the top of the hair. This Marine is a lieutenant, so we are going to mark out the lieutenant stripe on the helmet. For this, we're going to use grey cere, and you want to thin it out and simply mark out where you want the line and then block it in afterwards. You will need to apply 2 to 3 thin coats. With the grey cere dry, we are now going to use some Orthan Grey and repeat the same process, except our stripe is there this time, so it is much easier. Next, using Mephiston Red, we are going to apply another line on the inside of the white line. Take your time with this step because it can be difficult to tidy up Mephiston Red with Ulithan Grey, but if you do, don't panic and just take your time tidying it up. With your lieutenant markings finished, we will now focus on the lenses of the helmet, first by base coating them with Caliban Green. You will need to apply 2 coats of this. Next, using some Warpstone Glow, you want to apply on the inside of the lens, working your way outwards, leaving some of the Caliban Green on the outer edges of the lens. Similar to our previous step, we're going to use Moot Green and focus on the inside of the lens, and you want to leave some of the Warpstone and Caliban Green visible on the outer edges of the lens. With a 1-to-1 mix of Moot Green and Flash Gits Yellow, we're going to focus on the very inside of the lens. This is almost just a dot. To finish off the lenses and give them a reflective appearance, we're going to use White Scar and simply apply a small dot on the outer edge of the lens where the Caliban Green is. Moving on to the Kill Team squad marking, we are going to apply a KHORNE red stripe down the centre of the right knee. This needs to be thick enough to put one of the Gothic numeral 1s inside of it. With the KHORNE red dry, first we're going to apply an edge highlight of Evil Sun's Scarlet. We will be applying the second edge highlight, so this needs to be thick enough for you to apply a second edge highlight. The second edge highlight we're going to apply is Wild Rider Red. Like previous edge highlights, you want to leave some of that first edge highlight visible. Before we can varnish the model, we need to apply our transfers. This is a transfer kit from the new Sternguard box, and we are going to pick out one of the Raptor's heads, one of the Gothic numeral 1s, as well as a marking to put on the backpack to signify a lieutenant. With your transfer in place, we are now going to use microsol. This will help the transfer contour to the shoulder pad. Space Marine shoulder pads are notorious for their surface, and this is a must for anyone using transfers. Take your time and position it, because it may slide around when you apply the microsol. To complete the Mentor's iconography, we have to paint this raptor head with red. We're going to use Mephiston red for this step, and we will need to apply 2 thin coats of it. If you make any mistakes, just use your Ulithan grey to tidy it up. This is how your model will look at this step. We're now going to varnish the model with Tamiya TS80 flat clear. You will need to apply some Lahmian medium over the top of the transfers if you haven't used microsol, because the Tamiya can damage the water slide transfers. But if you have used microsol over the top, you'll be fine. With the varnish fully dried, we are now going to base coat the metallics. First, any area that is standard Mechanicus grey that is not the Under Armour, we're going to apply some lead belcher. Because we want the Aquila and the Deathwatch silver arm to be a polished steel, we are going to then base coat those areas with Ironbreaker. The areas that have been base coated with lead belcher, we are going to shade all over with Nuln Oil. Do not shade the areas that we've just painted Ironbreaker. We will use a different shade for that. With 1 part carbon black from Liquitex and 1 part Prussian blue hue from Liquitex, you're going to mix them with 20 parts of Lahmian medium and shade the areas that we base coated with Ironbreaker. I do like to use a wash brush for this because they are larger areas. And if you're going to paint a lot of Deathwatch, you may want to make a mixture of this color. Using a syringe to get accurate measurements can definitely help. Using Retributor Armour next, we're going to pick out all of the areas that we want to be gold, such as the skull on the shoulder pad and the Aquila on the chest, as well as the little trinket on his belt. Unfortunately, I forgot to film the shading of the gold, but using a mixture of 1 part transparent burnt sienna from Liquitex and 3 parts Lamy medium, you want to shade the whole gold area. We will then re-layer with Retributor armor. To brighten up the gold, we are going to use a mixture of 1 part Stormhost silver and 1 part Retributor gold, and pick out the higher points of the gold areas, leaving some of the previous colour visible. To finish off all areas of the metallics, including the polished steel, gold and mechanical areas of the lead belcher, we're going to edge highlight with Stormhost silver. With that step complete, your model is finished. I have glued this Deathwatch Marine together and applied him to a base. This is one of the bases that I use for my Necromunda, and we will be making a tutorial for it in the future. I hope you have found this tutorial helpful. If you have, please leave us a like as well as a comment, as it really helps the algorithm out, and I'll catch you next time.